Here's an example of something that you really shouldn't say on social media, or anywhere really, but particularly social media, because it's unlikely to ever get removed permanently, and it's likely to come back and bite you in the backside in the event that you get caught up in any kind of road traffic collision. Allow me to explain. So one chap yesterday, in response to a thread about other people reporting drivers for being on their phone, responded to said thread by saying, "This is why I purposely leave cyclists not enough room." Now, if you think about that statement for a moment, in the context that it was posted, in response to a video talking about reporting other drivers for being on the phone and going too close to other people and things like that, but obviously in response to a thread by a cyclist, one can reasonably infer, as the reasonably intelligent average reader, that this thread, this post, was to do with driving. So bear that in mind just for a little moment later. But why is this statement bad in the first place? Well, somebody making a statement publicly, quite boldly, to say, "This is why I purposely leave cyclists not enough room." So not leaving them enough room, it suggests, but whilst driving past them without leaving them the legal minimum space. Now, if ever that person is involved in a collision that injures or perhaps even kills a cyclist and is then prosecuted either for dangerous driving, careless driving, or even just driving without due care and consideration to other road users, but the more serious something, then the more likely this is to dig into anything that they've done and said before. The reason for that is that the Police and Criminal Evidence Act defines what a confession is. Now, most people will think of a confession as being something that an event has happened, a crime has happened, and then you've admitted the crime either in part or in full, and therefore that's what a confession means, and that's all that can be used. Some people might even think that it's got to be to the police, or that it's got to be in writing, or that it's got to be in some kind of formal statement to be a confession, but that's not necessarily true. Section 82 of PACE describes and defines what a confession is. Now, I'll come back to why it's important in a moment, but let's talk about the confession itself. A confession includes any statement that wholly or partly is adverse against the person that made that statement, whether or not it was to a person in authority, whether or not it was in words or diagrams or even gestures or something like that. And so any statement that could be taken to be at least partly against the person that made it will be deemed to be a confession. Why is that important? Well, as I said, if somebody is prosecuted for a serious offence, and as you'll know from listening to the news, police and the CPS, the police gather the evidence and the CPS assess the evidence and sometimes direct as to what evidence they want. The police will very often look back to CCTV, previous messages that have been exchanged, to determine whether there's any premeditation or planning, which are distinctly slightly different. Premeditation is just you had the thought beforehand to do something. Planning is going about setting up something and taking active steps towards planning a crime or something else. But even premeditation, even that you've had the thought before that you might do such a thing, or that you might be reckless as to something that might ultimately amount to an offence or to cause somebody harm. Now, the reason that these are important is because they come into play with the Sentencing Council guidelines. Was there any premeditation or significant degree of planning involved in the commission of the offence? So let's say that our chap on Twitter, having posted a clear statement that he, as I inferred, drives around by not leaving enough room for anybody. He later denied it and said that it wasn't talking about driving, but that's by the by. I think he was. That's my opinion. But let's say that he was involved in some kind of collision and a cyclist or a pedestrian or somebody else is injured or hurt, and then the police go looking at his social media to say, let's take a look at the background social profile of this guy to see whether or not he's done this before, whether he's talked about doing this before, or whether there's anything in there that can be used to go against him. And then before you know it, there's an application to use said tweet and anything else that is said against that person, because it can amount to a confession. A confession doesn't necessarily need to be after the event. For example, if there are messages between a suspect or defendant and somebody else that ultimately go against their interests, they are adverse to the person making it, and then they go and commit the offence, then obviously those statements might be used against them to prove that they had the premeditation and the planning involved in committing that offence in the first place. So let this be a lesson to you before you post something on social media, particularly if it could go against you in situations such as this. Think very carefully about it, don't post it, and keep it to yourself. In the meantime, please do like the video and subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.